large distributors in North America. I got a taste for doing OT stuff while I was there. Ran into a company called Cradle Point that some of you may be familiar with. They make portable routers that run off of 5G technologies, and now I work for them, and I manage their security engineering department. Right now, I've only got a couple of employees. We're looking to grow that team, so we have postings. If you check out the hashtag jobs section, I've posted a couple of roles out there. And I'm really excited about what I do. I get a chance to mentor and I get a chance to work with other people and kind of proselytize security across our organization. I've got my third kid on the way. Three daughters. We name them. They have real names, but we call them Bit and Bite. And the third one we don't have a name for, so we're taking any options. I'm leaning towards Quark right now. My husband, been married for 10 years to a lady that I met in high school, so almost 15 years that we've known each other, and we're national park enthusiasts. We go to the national parks, the state parks, parks anywhere that we can get to. If there's a park nearby, we started out going to them because we were cheap and they're cheap, and then we fell in love with them, and we spent our fifth in Yellowstone there, and then we're hoping to go out to Joshua Tree this fall. So that's who I am. Who's our audience? Our audience for this talk is going to be potential InfoSec team members. So anybody who's wanting or thinking about possibly going into information security roles, college students who are maybe doing their first 2 years of college and they're not really sure what they want to do, but they think InfoSec might be cool. This is for you. And all my talks will be able to be found on my GitHub afterwards. All my updated slides will be there. And so if you want to take this talk and rip it off and go give it somewhere else, I absolutely encourage you to do so. Take and put your details on the front page, change the who am I, and go and share the InfoSec gospel to people, right? This is also super useful for your business partners, finding the people inside your company that you need to work with and letting them know what security does, because security is just kind of this group that usually tells people no. So getting a chance to share out and describe what your security team does, you can always take these slides and tailor them for that. It's also for second career seekers. I know a lot of people who made this their second career, people who were in food service, adults who had degrees and were doing something else, and because of life challenges or changes, they decided to check out something else. One that I work really closely with now is a lady who was a teacher for, I want to say 20 years, and now she's been in InfoSec for like the last 4 because she got tired of teaching and wanted to find something different, and that's where she's at now. Other friends who were in food service, they worked as barbacks and bartenders for 7, 8, 9 years, and then decided that they were breaking their backs. They didn't want to do it anymore, and they wanted to get out, so they found themselves a second career. And the other group is your executives, right? If you want to be able to share with your executives what a security team is, what it's built out of, and why you need one, or what capabilities you might want to mature, or anything like that, these slides can be useful for you as well. All right. Any questions before I get going? All right, cool. Let's do it. All right, so a brief overview of who you're going to meet on this slide deck. One is going to be blue teamers, right? You may have heard this term before. You've got blue team and red team. It used to be white team and black team, or white hats and black hats. In recent years, as people have tried to get more culturally sensitive, they've retired those terms, just like they've retired black hat and white hat. Even though those terms aren't racially loaded, they originated from cowboy movies in the 50s and 60s. Basically, the good guys were always wearing white. If you go back and look at John Wayne's hat, he's going to be in white hats in most of his movies, and the bad guys are always going to be in black hats. And it was an easy way to signal to the audience who was a good guy and who was a bad guy, right? And so we had adopted that moniker for a long time. Those have been retired now, and mostly we use blue team for the good guys, red team for the bad guys, and then purple team will be when blue and red team works together, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Blue team will have a bunch of different roles we'll cover, as will red team. And then we'll also talk about GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. I'll tell you a little bit about what that is. VMDR, which is vulnerability management, detection, and remediation. And there's some analysts there and some software developers there. I'm actually going to put, I'll leave that like it is for now. I don't want to change it right now. And then engineering and architecture. I'm going to start in engineering and architecture because that's the group that I manage today. And that's where I have my most deep background, and it's probably the job that's easiest to go into if you have any IT experience, which it sounds like a couple of you on the call do. So this may be the most interesting place for you. We lost Ivan. He said no, he's out of here. He's not putting up with me. That's okay. We'll get him back on the other side. Uh, engineering and architecture. Engineering is most often going to be just like you find traditional system administrators in the environment. You're going to find security engineers in the environment. So security engineers are going to spend a lot of their time focusing on how to make platforms and systems safe. And you often get called in because you need to help with something, right? The business says we're going to do X, and they ask IT, how do we do X, or we're going to do X, and we're planning on doing this. What do we do about it now? And the IT team, if there's a good partnership between IT and security, calls up their security team and says, hey, security team, we need a safe way to do X. And so a lot of times when we look at the way that IT works, a lot of IT, like networks and systems architects or system platform providers, are going to be focused on availability, right? They're not going to be worried as much about confidentiality and integrity, which are kind of the security domains people have thought for years. Instead, they're really going to be focused on the availability. How do we get the system up, and how do we let the users get onto the system? A lot of times that's fine, but in information security, you end up letting a system be too available because it ends up being available to people that it shouldn't be. And so hopefully your security people are going to be able to work alongside you if you're in an IT role, like a sysadmin role or a networking role, to help put RELs and safeguards on that conversation so that we can make sure that those systems are actually safe. So a lot of what I do as an engineer is going to be looking at security baselines for my systems that I have to deal with, right? Making sure that all those systems are secured to a minimum standard that I've selected. So we don't expect our IT admins, our sysadmins, our platform engineers to necessarily be security experts. So we have these security engineers, and they're going to worry about the safety of how data gets onto that system, meaning how it talks on the network level. Things that would be in that would be like, are you using TLS? Are you using TLS 1.3? If you're using TLS 1.3, which cipher suites are you using behind that TLS? What certificate authority are you using? Are you using a certificate authority that meets our minimum standards for what a certificate authority needs to be? Or are you using self-signed certificates? If you are, do we know why, and is there a reason for it, and have we agreed that we're going to do that because that system can handle that level, right? A lot of what we do as engineers is trying to find all those tweaks and twists and pushing the right buttons to make sure that those systems stay secure. Things that I've done in the last few weeks, deployed agents through an Intune environment, helped secure a cloud resource group in Azure, deployed a cloud protection technology within AWS using infrastructure as code. If you guys aren't familiar with that, we can talk about that later. Let's see, stood up a SIM product, which included installing Linux servers and then securing those Linux servers and then deploying my agents on those Linux servers with appropriate firewall controls. Yeah, that's a lot of what that looks like. NanoFrog said, "What infrastructure as code solution do you use?" We use Terraform. So Terraform is a great product that allows you to spin up infrastructure. Terraform is mostly used to stand up the underlying infrastructure. So if I need to, we'll just give you an example. For the SIM environment I was standing up, I needed 3 servers. I need them all secured to the same standard. And I needed them all in a specific VLAN within AWS or Azure, and I needed them all to have a certain image that they were going to be spun up from, right? And so Terraform is a declarative language. It allows you to go in and say, build 3 machines. Those machines need to be in a shared VLAN. They need to have firewall rules between them. They need to use a CIS level 1 server image as their background, or a custom image that I might have built or whatever and hosted myself. And then once those run, I need Ansible to run on top, and Ansible is going to install my software and all those kind of things. So Terraform and Ansible are really used for 2 different issues. Terraform's used to stand up the platforms Terraform will work with ESXi, with AWS, GCP, Azure, Proxmox, uh, what else? VMware. It works everywhere, right? Terraform is going to spin up the boxes for us and do the network layer, and then Ansible is going to do the things that need to happen on top of the actual operating system, like install a script, or run a script, install a piece of software, set a set of configurations, whatever I need to do. If you're considering going into engineering, especially security engineering, but just IT engineering in general, Terraform and Ansible are both completely free. You can deploy them on a laptop. You can deploy them on a Raspberry Pi. You can deploy them on 15 VMs that you spun up on your box. It's really just completely straightforward. Would Terraform be a competitor to something like Puppet? I don't have experience with Puppet. I think Puppet's more like Ansible. Terraform is to spin up your infrastructure, and then Ansible is going to be deploying things on the actual OS. So it'd be like going to your team and saying, I need 5 VMs in Terraform versus I need you to go on this server and install this agent and configure it this way. Ansible is going to do the install and the configuration. All right. Any questions about that part of engineering, or what an engineer's day might look like? All right. Other things that I do as an engineer, or that my team does, is proof of concepts. Right. You'll do this whether you're on the IT side or the security side. Proof of concepts mean that the company hands down a set of rules. We'll talk about GRC in a minute. The company hands down a set of rules, and they say we need to find products that allow us to meet these rules. And hey, engineering team, we need you to go out. You're the experts. Go and look at products. Find products that are going to help us meet these rules. Test out the products. Build them in a test environment. Determine if we can operationalize them. And then if we can operationalize them, figure out what the cost is, and we'll put them in production, right? Now you have procurement teams, you have legal teams, you have architects you're going to have to work with, you may have review boards, but basically that's the idea. As the engineer, the business is expecting you to use your expertise to go in and review what the security products are and make the best selection for your use case. So that's not always the most expensive tool. It's not always the tool that everybody else is using. You may have heard the phrase, nobody gets fired for buying IBM. That's completely untrue. In fact, if somebody suggested buying IBM at the company I'm currently at, I'd probably try and beat them with a frying pan because it's not fit for purpose for what we're doing. So it doesn't matter if it's in the Gartner Magic Quadrant or if it's some super special thing that somebody's used before. As the engineer, you're assessing what's fit for your environment and what's fit for your use cases. Architects, well, before I move on to architects, any other questions about engineers? And am I talking like way too fast? Because I have a tendency to do that in presentations where I can't see people's faces. So that's not a slam at you guys. It's just a fault that I know I have. Good pace. You're doing great. All right, I'll keep up then. All right, architects. Architects are going to work with their engineering teams and their GRC teams. Again, I promise we're going to go back to GRC in a moment and talk about what they do. But architects are going to take the things that the company needs, and they're going to keep it all documented. They're going to say this is their current state. They're going to work with the business to determine what the future state needs to look like, and they're going to determine what it means to get like from here to there. There are two different versions of what architecture should look like. One is what you'll find lots of places because they couldn't afford to give their IT team or their security team any more money. And so they slap an architect title on them, and you have what's essentially a senior engineer, and he's been declared an architect. It's not his fault. It's the business's fault. They shouldn't do that. They're setting him up to fail. If he goes and walks into anywhere else in the world that has a true architecture team, and he says, I'm an architect, give me a job, and they're going to say, great, go build TOGAF standards, go set up my templates for us, like help us track our current state, our mid state, and our future state. And he's going to go, what the hell are you talking about? I just install products and do POVs. Like, I don't know what's happening. I see this happen a lot. Again, it's not that architect's fault or that senior engineer's fault. It's just company handing out architect titles without understanding what an architect actually does. So what we want to see from an architect, if you go to school for architecture, You don't necessarily find the guy who can build the best house, who can swing the hammer the best, to sit down at the computer all day and do all the CAD drawings and figure out what the house needs to look like, right? He definitely will have relevant insight, and people should definitely talk to him, the guy who can swing the hammer the best. But he also probably needs to talk to the homeowner and see what the homeowner actually wants built, how many people are going to live in the house, the building codes, where the homeowner lives. All of those things are going to be relevant and tied together. It's going to be the exact same way with an InfoSec architect, where the InfoSec architect is going to have to work with the business to understand what the business is doing, what they want to do, and where they want to do it at, and when they want to do it, right? So that we can be ready, understand the processes that go into those, and understand the new softwares and things that need to be pulled in. So a good architect is going to document where the business is at, meaning what infrastructure are we using today, what security tooling are we using today, and they're going to do it in conjunction with IT architects and other network architects and other people, right? But they're going to try and plan for and document what's current and then where the business wants to go. So if the whole business says, hey, in 3 years we want to be 100% in the cloud, then the architects need to start planning for how they're going to support their core business functions and the cloud, right? The goal here is that if you have good architects who know what they're doing, they're going to say, okay, hey, engineers, these next few products that we're installing, these next things that we're building, because we know that they're going to need to be in the cloud, this is the template by which you're going to build them in the cloud. So an architectural template doesn't have all the answers on it, but it has the base information that you need, right? It says, if you want to build this set of systems, you're going to put them in Azure, maybe, because that's what the company selected as their cloud of choice, and that's what they're building for, right? And in that Azure cloud, you're going to have resource groups available, and you're going to store your passwords and your API keys and everything in an Azure Key Vault. And we're going to stand up a VPN tunnel because I've worked with the networking architects and I know that that's what they plan to do. We're going to stand up an express lane from Azure onto our current infrastructure. So you're going to be able to spin that up there. And you're going to use an ESXi host that IT is putting out there. You're not going to spin up your own VMs. And those are going to be managed, and et cetera, right? So as the engineer, when this order comes down to you or when you go to build the thing, if you have a good architect, you can go to that architect and you can say, hey, architect, I want to build in Azure. And they're going to say, great, you can build in Azure, build whatever you want in Azure, but here's the minimum set of standards that you need to build to. These are the security controls you need to have in place. These are the separation of duties that need to exist. You need to have these kind of processes in place, like business continuity, disaster recovery, whatever it is, right? And you need to maybe, if it's restricted or confidential data, then you need to store it in this way, encrypt it in this way, or whatever. The difference is the architect's not going to tell you where to put the nails and what kind of wood to use and those kind of things necessarily. The architect's just going to give you an outline of a house, a frame of a house, and say, hey, yeah, if you're building in the cloud, you got to put in pillars. You got to have these certain security technologies around it. It's not just willy-nilly. You can't just go out to the cloud and build what you want. We have a certain minimum set of standards. And the same if you do it on-prem or whatever, right? The architects will also usually work on product selection to help determine what the product is that's being put into place and prevent there from being duplication of effort and products, right? If my product team is using AWS and my IT team is using Azure and my marketing team wants to use Google Cloud, there's probably a lot of spend, a lot of waste that's happening there, a lot of churn that's happening, and honestly, probably some shadow IT, right? Some IT that's happening out of like good governance and good rules and those kind of things. So an architect's going to help keep all that together. Lots of times you'll have something called an architectural review board that gets built, and that architectural review board is where you'll actually take your plans. So if you're the business, you'll go to the architectural review board and you'll say, we want to do a thing. And the architectural review board will say, tell us what problem you want to solve, tell us what solution you're looking at, those kind of things. And the architectural review board will go back and say, hey, we're planning for this, we're building this, we know we need these IT resources, these network resources, these security resources. They'll go back, they'll put together a plan, they'll bring it back to the business and say, hey, business, is this fit for purpose? Does this do the things that you want it to do? Is it okay that we build it this way? Okay, it is. great, we're going to go start building it. And they'll go and do the needful, right? Or they won't, but they'll hand the orders down to the IT team, the network team, the architecture team, or engineering team, rather. Does that give a good idea of what architects are doing on their day to day? Somebody typing, saying, no, you're a moron. Who put this guy in charge of the talk? Sorry, I gotta wait on feedback because I don't want to go on and then. Well, so Nanofrog, as a sysadmin, it depends on which architect you got, right? So you may have an architect that's a senior engineer who's getting paid more, and they needed to slap the title on him in order to make sure that they could pay him enough to stay because he was senior enough that the pay bands didn't go high enough for a senior architect. I mean, a senior engineer, so they moved him to an architecture slot. Almost always, if you're looking at the pay hierarchy from uh, Wiley, if you're looking at it from IBM Compass, if you're looking at it from NIST or anything, your architecture jobs are going to be like your highest paid jobs. And so I've been at several companies where architects didn't really do architecture. They were really just senior engineers. They just slapped an architect title on there because otherwise they weren't going to be able to put them in a pay band that was wide enough. It's good to know since we don't have designated architects or engineers, lol. We in the sysadmins wear many hats. Yeah, my favorite phrase here for that is archineering. And so when you have architects that are too far down into the weeds, um, or you have engineers who aren't being supported by their architects, and so they're having to push up and like kind of provide that next step. I just call them archineers. It's that band in the middle there. A good senior engineer is going to have a good working relationship with his architects, and it's kind of going to be like an officer and enlisted um, kind of situation. Being military, that's the way that makes the most sense to me. If you have a lieutenant who comes in who's right out of college and he says like I'm a lieutenant and you're going to listen to me, it's real quick that a staff sergeant's going to put him in his place and tell him how far he can go and what he can do when he gets there, right? Um, so it can often happen that if you get an architect in that's too enthusiastic, a senior engineer may help put them back into place, right? And say, hey, you've designed this la la land environment that we can't build or support. We don't have the tools, we don't have the knowledge. So the architect has to know his engineers. The architect has to know what technologies are already in place and what the capabilities of those technologies are, and then work with their engineers to develop actually realistic understandings of what our current capabilities are and then what our future capabilities are. Um, uh, cool. Spotted said he's recording this time, so thanks, man. I appreciate it greatly. I forgot to start my recording before this, so you just saved us. Next time I won't even have to give this. I can just come in and start the video and then sit and answer chats. No. So, all right. So that's what our architects do. Anything else about architects before we move on? If you're a sysadmin, you may make a great architect, in security or otherwise, because if you've been a sysadmin long enough, you know what the capabilities are. You know what your engineers can do. You know what your admins should be able to do. You know what's realistic. You may find that you absolutely love architecting. It's a lot of documentation. It's a lot of writing processes. It's a lot of poking holes in other people's processes. Another thing that architects and engineers should be doing is threat modeling. Whereas you're documenting the current state of things, you should be looking for gaps or holes in the current infrastructure, and then planning for how you're going to fill those holes. And then other people who bring you ideas, like the business, and they say, "Hey, we want to do this thing or whatever." Um, you should be prepared to also apply threat models to the things that they bring you and say, okay, yeah, you can do this, but here's the minimum standard by which we have to do this because you're dealing with PII or you're dealing with this or that or whatever's going on. So, and that's why GRC people suck, and you should never talk to them. No, I'm just kidding. Omar, thanks for joining us, man. I was just getting into to talk about GRC because we just finished talking about architects, and if you want to contribute here, I would love to have your have any information that you want to share. Omar and I have worked together for a while at a previous job, and then we still stay in touch often as we call each other and say, "Can you believe they're doing this?" For whatever crazy thing we find the business doing.
Absolutely. I appreciate the warm welcome, Justin.
Yeah.
Honestly, I could not have paid you off any better. That was $20 well spent. Uh, Hi everyone. Yeah, I've worked in information security now for about 5 years. Spent some time at in the insurance industry. Now I'm in still healthcare adjacent. But as far as GRC specifically, I did about a year and a half in governance, and then spent the rest of my time in risk. Um, so if there's any open questions about quantitative risk analysis, I did that for years. Um, and on governance, I'm um,
Well,
less knowledgeable.
let me rewind and I'll tell them what governance, risk, and compliance are because we haven't done
Sure.
that. I was kind of jumping around my slide, so we haven't covered that yet, and then we can talk about quantitative versus qualitative. So governance, risk, and compliance usually gets grouped together into one area. People in this area I've seen be introductory into information security, sometimes coming from a second career or making GRC a second career, or maybe GRC is the first job that they can get out of college. They're not super technical, but it's a good place to start because it's a lot of legwork and paperwork. It's definitely a people position, in my opinion, but governance covers governance, right? So if you're doing business, wherever you're doing business, there are local, state, and federal laws, or national laws, global laws, whatever, wherever you're at. There are laws that dictate how you can do business, right? I can only sell certain products to certain people in certain places, and I have to comply with certain rules when I do. And governance is going to make sure that I'm doing that. So your governance team is going to work with your legal team. You're going to have to stay abreast to changes in your market area to make sure that whatever you're selling, whatever service you're providing, you're doing it legally. So that's going to be the governance part. Does that sound fair, Omar?
Yes, well, sort of. So I would say governance isn't necessarily concerned about the legality. It would be more about that your organization has policies, procedures, and documentation uh, that everyone can standardize on. So governance is about making sure that there exists documented standardization. And of course, in an ideal world, your company would do what is legal. Um, but that would be technically someone else that would make sure that the adequate laws are included in the governance program. But yeah, governance would be doing things like policy reviews, audits, um, checking for gaps. So gap assessment would fall under governance. Um, Technically, whether something's legal or not uh, would be outside of that scope.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, then I was very confidently wrong. So I appreciate you being here, Omar, to help with this. So governance is going to be more about making sure that we have standards and policies in place, and then we're following those standards and policies. In my head, I'd always put that in the compliance bucket. So can you help us understand what compliance is instead? Is that the one that's laws and contracts?
Yeah. So
Okay.
compliance would be checking the gap between what you've documented and what you're actually doing. So that would be still related, right? So governance is these are the things the organization states we are all going to do. Compliance is checking, are we doing the things we said we were going to do? Um, Again, not necessarily what's legal, more are we doing what we said we were going to do? And hopefully the standards we've written uh, meet the legal standard. But I would imagine a company like Exxon or maybe the U.S. military, they may do things that are shall we say extrajudicial.
All right, that's fair. I guess where my confusion is I'm always dealing with the compliance side, and I've always worked in heavily regulated industries. So I'm in telecommunications now. Before I was in a publicly traded telecommunications company, no less. And then I was previously in food and beverage, and then before that in insurance and health insurance, right, with you. So it was always, oh, well, we're trying to comply with HIPAA, or we're trying to comply with SOC, or we have this FDA thing that's making us comply. But really, those were just the drivers for our governance, and then our
Exactly.
compliance team was keeping check. We were doing what we said we were doing. Okay, cool. I'm gonna update my slides and make them more better for next time. So I appreciate it. And then risk is going to be what happens if our compliance team figures out that we're not doing the things that our governance team has set. Giving a pause for Omar to put me back on track if I'm wrong, right?
Yeah, I think that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, cool. Okay. And so risk, in my experience, the people who have worked in risk are often meeting with the business and discussing what's happening. Where I've interfaced with risk from an engineering standpoint is if my risk team was not overtly technical, then they would come to me and say, hey, the business is doing X. Can you help us understand what the technical threat is, right? So risk is measured by the likelihood that it's going to happen and then the severity of it if it does, right? I love that little diagram. I don't have it in my slides, but I need to find it. If you've taken any classes on risk, there's a little stick man, and it's got like the high probability because the chasm is really wide, but then the chasm's only like this deep, and so it's like there's a high probability that he'll fall in the hole, but there's a minimal risk if he does, or minimal damage if he does. Um, with the inverse being that the hole's super deep, but the hole's super narrow. So it's very likely that the stickman could just walk around the hole or walk over the hole with some mitigation. And so where I've interfaced with risk is the business knows that, or risk knows that there's something that we're not doing. We're either breaking a law or breaking a governance standard that's been put in place, or we're violating a policy. We're doing something that's going to carry with it some kind of penalty. And that penalty may be judicial in that we'll get fined or we'll have to pay something, or it may be technical in that we'll get breached or the company's ability to perform its business function gets affected in some way. That risk can either be measured in a qualitative risk or a quantitative risk. Omar, will you walk us through what those look like?
Sure. So the elevator speech version of that is going to be qualitative risk. It's going to be what you typically see. Think of a stoplight, right? Red, yellow, green. So a green is typically described as being a low risk, a yellow, a medium risk, and a high risk. Uh, Part of the reason that people do that is that's really easy to present to an executive and get a lot of information across quickly. Now, quantitative risk is going to look at that approach and say that doesn't give someone enough information to make a good decision on, right? Essentially, the classic example is you get two things that are classified as a high risk. How do you prioritize them? Quantitative risk is going to attempt to help the executives prioritize it by dollar amounts. So essentially, like Justin was talking about, we take this idea of a frequency, how often does the bad thing happen, and a magnitude, how bad is it going to be when it happens, and you turn it into dollars, right? So your frequency is going to be normalized as an annual number, and your magnitude is going to be in dollars. So you'd be able to communicate in dollar amount or whatever currency you decide to use. Bitcoin Bros, whatever. And at that point, someone can look at two distinct risks and say, I'll handle the $20 million risk before the $500,000 risk, even though the title on the $500 risk may be scarier and the technology described and the attack may be more novel. If the impact to my organization isn't as high, it really shouldn't grab my attention like the others. I will say a good risk management program needs quite a bit of external support. You can't have a risk team that's a whole bunch of Don Quixotes tilting at windmills. A successful risk management program must have a risk tolerance that is given by the organization. The organization must decide a concrete dollar amount value that it says, I am willing to accept between this number of risk and that number of risk. And typically, one of your bounds should be what you're willing to insure yourself for. If you have $100 million of cyber risk insurance, then anything that exceeds that must be addressed because by definition, you're not paying to cover more than that, right? All right. I'll try not to break my ankles falling off this high horse here.
No, I love it. If you want to give a risk talk, man, I nerd out on this stuff. It's not the thing that I love to do. I'm passionate about doing engineering, But I love to talk about risk, and I love to hear the thought that goes behind it because as an engineer, it's where I need the most help, right? When I go and talk to an executive and I say, "This is bad," and he says, "How bad?" And I go, "It's really bad," and he goes, "Well, how bad?" And I go, "I don't know. I don't know how to speak the language of the executive to tell them that this is bad. So if I can go to my risk guys and I can say, hey, risk guys, I think this is going to happen and this is what's going to happen when it does, then they can help me get that quantitative number to come back and say, hey, it's $20 million bad, or it's $30 million bad, or it's $130 million bad, or whatever." Um, so I really appreciate that. There's also a piece of engineering and architecture where your risk team relies on you as an engineer or architect to help describe what the mitigations might be. So mitigations are anything that we can do to offset the likelihood of that risk occurring or the magnitude of that risk occurring, um, and reduce the impact overall, right? So sometimes that means that you're called on as an engineer or an architect for your expertise, and they say, "Hey, we're doing this process today. What could we change in this process that may not meet the policy, but will get us closer to where we need to be, so that we can continue to do this thing?" Any comments there?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I picked up on a couple of things I wanted to address specifically. One, it may not address the policy completely. Absolutely, sometimes when you're dealing with a risk, there will be the idea of mitigating the risk, as in making it less bad. It may not make it good, but you can certainly make it less bad. Um, the other side of the equation, this idea of solutioning it, that's key, I think, to be able to present a decent decision, right? I tell you, I've got a $20 that you need to make a decision on.
Omar, I
It's
don't know if
going
you
to
can hear
cost
me, sir, but we lost you.
$100.
You've turned into a robot. Um,
Ah,
Go ride your horse back 5 feet from wherever you're at and try again.
okay. Where did you lose me?
There we go. I wasn't listening up. Um, we just lost it for like 30 seconds, man. Just like 30 seconds.
Okay.
So you're talking about
Okay,
solutioning,
gotcha.
and then yeah,
Yeah,
you cut out.
yeah. So on the solutioning side, one thing I would definitely key in on there is being able to present a valuable solution or a value conscious solutions is critical. You have a $20 million problem, $100 million solution isn't going to be reasonable. If you have a $20 million problem and a $5 million solution, that that may be something that's workable. Oftentimes when we're dealing with a risk, it's going to require hours of people's time. And that stuff's just not in the budget. It doesn't magically pop up. So you may have to rely on consultants. You may have to think outside the box. Um, so whenever someone is talking about risk, fundamentally you're saying, we did not budget for this calendar year. You need to either, as an executive, decide, are you going to do this next calendar year, or if you're going to do it this calendar year, you're going to have to pay for it somehow. So that money piece is so critical in being able to, I think, in being able to communicate that to a decision maker. Otherwise, you give them a big red screen, they're going to go, so what? What do I do with this? My budget's already set. I can't fix it. Sorry.
Yep. Cool. All right. Questions for Omar while we've got him. Any questions around risk or governance, compliance, what it means to work in those areas? I think it's a great thing if you're not super technical and you don't want to be super technical. If you were at our talk on Saturday this past week, Nick works in governance and compliance, and he just said outright, he said, I got into IT, realized I didn't want to be as technical as I needed to be to succeed, but I still wanted to be close to security. And I liked talking to people, and I liked being a people person and doing meetings. And so I stuck with governance and risk and compliance because that was where I was happy, right? So I don't want it to be something that people look at and be like, "Oh, that's like a subpar job in infosec." It's not. It's super essential, but it's kind of like that scene in Office Space where it's like, "What do you say you do here?" Well, I talk to the engineers because nobody else can understand them, and then I also have to talk to the business to help the business make decent decisions, right? To help keep the business safe.
Absolutely. I would say if you're doing quantitative risk analysis, yeah, you probably need to be decent with a spreadsheet, but empathy is going to be your biggest biggest tool. being able to communicate and understand where someone's coming from and relay that to someone else is absolutely core. So strong communication skills, written or spoken, are a key component there. Similar with governance, a lot of your time is spent with people that are decision makers going, hey, you're responsible for this. Yes, I know it sucks. I need you to read this crappy policy and tell me how we can make it better, or sign your name here and we'll see each other in 12 months. So no, I agree fully with Justin. You don't have to be a command line wizard to work in security. In fact, I think quite a few organizations would benefit from more people that are just able to work in a Word doc, and speak and communicate cleanly and clearly about what our standards are. Just writing down, this is how we deploy a laptop is, I mean, it's critical. People have to be able to do this stuff so you can repeat it.
So that's one of my benefits too of working closely with my GRC folks is when I'm trying to get a stakeholder like a business partner to do something securely, right? A lot of times they'll say, well, where's the policy or standard that says I have to do that? Because as an engineer or an architect, you're only backing for what you're trying to force the business to do to stay safe is a policy, right? So I can't tell you how many times governance and compliance have called me and said, hey, we need your help writing a policy. We want the business to do this. We want them to do it securely. They don't know how. The architects and engineers need to tell us what the secure path is, so that we can get that documented and hold people to it. And then later, I can go back and say, hey, you have to do it securely. We have a policy that says so. The executives in charge of deciding how we do things have decided that this is what we're doing. Imaging, yeah. Daniki, that's a good point, right? Imaging is one of those things that if it's not done securely, it's one of those foundational things that explodes out across the whole environment. One of the craziest things I've experienced in a company is I went to the IT team and I said, I need a server on this subnet so that I can do some security functions. And they said, cool, what kind of server do you want? And I said, oh, what flavors do you offer? Right. And I was expecting them to say, we have Windows 2022 and 2019. We have Linux Red Hat, and we have AIX or Solaris or whatever the options were. And they said, oh, no, just send me an ISO, just whatever ISO you want us to deploy for you. And I was blown away. We had no policy to back us, so we couldn't stop them from doing this, right? And they had nothing stopping them from doing so, or any motivator to stop them from doing that. And so we're still that environment is still being worked on and cleaned up and those kind of things because there wasn't policy behind it. There was no governance or compliance occurring that said you couldn't just spin up a Temple OS box if you really wanted to, as insane as that would be. So, all right. Any more questions before governance and compliance? Or governance, risk, and compliance? Omar, I would behoove or beseech you to please do like an hour-long talk on this. I think it's an infinitely fascinating uh, um, subject. Sorry, I lost my word there for a minute. And one that most of the InfoSec people that I know don't know enough about, and so they don't have a good way to communicate risk to stakeholders, shareholders, businesses, etc. And Daniki gave you a +1 as well. So if we can get you on the calendar, we'd love to have you.
Awesome. No, I'm flattered. I can't really come out and say, yeah, you need to have good, strong written and spoken communication skills, and then say no to you now, can I? Crap. All right.
Perfect. I'll work with you to get a time on the calendar and get a slide deck for us.
Okay, for sure. I'm going to drop off, but if anyone has any questions, absolutely hit me up on the server. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye.
That is totally not Omar. Thank you. Totally not Omar. Round of applause. All right. Love that guy to death. Great dude to know. If you wanna know people. Oh, is he still on here? Dang it. Okay. All right, let's talk about VMDR. VMDR is the bane of everyone's existence. I personally do not like this career choice. I would not make this career choice. I know some people who love it, and they have built their careers on being the person who does this because nobody else wants to do it. Most of you have probably dealt with this person. VMDR is vulnerability management, detection, and remediation. Has anybody on the call dealt with a product called Qualys or Nessus, or had to deal with the results of those scans? Or yeah, Qualys. I see people typing in chat. Yep. Okay. These VMDR people are the guys and gals who run the VMDR program and run Qualys and run Nessus. They figure out where if you have a good architect, the architect figures out where the scanners need to go, and the engineers will deploy their apps and all this kind of stuff. Spotted, you may love this one then, man. Some people like this. It's not my bag. I don't enjoy it. If you're not familiar, basically, what most often happens is, in general, your day to day looks like making sure that everything in the environment's patched, right? Making sure every part of the environment is scanned, making sure that once things are scanned, that they're identified correctly, that their owners are known, so that you know who to contact if something's not being patched, etc. And then going in and making sure that those patches get applied based on whatever the governance is, like Omar was talking about. The company's going to select a patching policy, right? The company may say for CVEs, commonly exploitable vulnerability. Wait, common CVE. I don't know what CVE stands for all of a sudden. I'm not having a great night. This is the end of a very long week, but and it's even a short week for me. I'm off tomorrow, but anyway, CVEs come in. CVEs get scored based on how easy they are to exploit and how much knowledge somebody has to have and how much access somebody has to have. And so your VMDR folks really help work with the risk folks to communicate risk to the business and say, hey, maybe our core financial services aren't getting patched like they're supposed to, because we really don't want to take them down, because we really don't want the financial servers offline often. But they've not been patched in 6 months, and now there's this CVE that's a 9.9, and any script kiddie can go and download this tool off GitHub and just blow away our finance servers, right? So we need to be able to patch them, and we need to patch them now. Or downside to CVEs is that there are vulnerabilities that don't get scores that are serious. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times, if you're a VMDR person, you see those CVEs, and the CVEs that are scored high aren't realistic for your environment. So one of the things that we saw with Log4j, if you remember in 2022, Log4j kind of took the world by storm. It was this fault that was found in logging code for JavaScript, and it was used everywhere, all over the world, right? And it was on public-facing stuff and private networks, and it was embedded in applications, and it was just everywhere, and it was a nightmare to get it patched. And the CVE was pretty significant. What I saw our VMDR folks do in that scenario was come in and help scope our understanding of the risk, right? So if we just looked at what had Log4j in our environment, there were thousands, tens of thousands of objects that were running Log4j at the time. When I was working for the food and beverage distributor, we had servers on every continent. We had, except for Antarctica, we had them in all kinds of languages and localities. We had some forward facing, some only backwards facing, some that only faced vendors. But we had this Log4j nightmare everywhere. And so the VMDR folks really helped us a lot with scoping and came in and said, yeah, Log4j is exploitable, but it's only exploitable under these conditions. Because we have good scanning set up and we know where all of our assets are and we have a good asset inventory, we know that these are the assets that are forward facing on the internet. And so we need to prioritize those and start getting those patched first. Then the next one needs to be the one that are vendor facing, and then we need to start taking care of the ones that are internal. Here's the business owners for those, the people responsible for patching. These are the people we need to notify that their servers are going down and all that kind of stuff, right? So vulnerability, VMDR, is essential to the business. It's essential in helping to communicate risk, and it's essential to figuring out what to do when you have too much to do. You'll find insecurity that you're never wanting for work in a company that actually wants to be secure. I have been at companies that have done security theater. What that means is that they bought cyber insurance. Their cyber insurer said, you have to have a SOC team, you have to have so many security engineers, and you have to have so many security analysts or whatever. And so they went and hired us all. And we said, hey, you're doing a lot of things within the business that are critically unsafe. I was with one company that had no EDR whatsoever, no malware or antivirus protection on their domain controllers. Was absolutely the wildest thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And when I tried to deploy antivirus to those, I was told that the domain controllers were managed by a third party, and that third party accepted the risk of not having antivirus software on the domain controllers. Literally blew my mind. Yeah, Daniki, this was next level insane. I left that company with an hours long meeting with the vice president of ethics and a 7-page what's the word, deposition, essentially, to the lawyers saying, like, look, I'm out of here. I don't want to get the stink of this company on me, because when you guys get popped, it's going to be really, really bad. And I'm not trying to have that on my resume, because I've told you guys everything that you can do to fix it. And when I went to the next company, I was sitting in the interview with the guy, and he said, why are you leaving the current company? Like, that's a fairly large and significant company. And I said, we have matured the security environment as far as the business will allow. And the guy who was interviewing me took the hint there and understood what I was saying. But in VMDR, you're going to be looking at all this work that needs to be done, and somebody's got to be able to scope and say, these are the things that we actually need to work on. When I go to my IT teams, if you've been a sysadmin for any length of time and you've dealt with the patching folks, I know you've had patching folks that have come to you and been like, we have to patch this now. It's critical. It's a critical vulnerability, da 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 da. But what good VMDR folks are going to do is contextualize that information and help prioritize and contextualize and get that stuff worked on. So I've said all these really nice things about it, but I also have said that it's not my bag. I know people who do this for a living. If you want to talk to them, like Spotted said, he was into this. Let me know, throw your hand up, and I'll find you somebody who has expertise in this area, and this is what they do day to day. And you can talk to them more about what their life is like. Another thing that gets put into VMDR sometimes it gets rolled over to red team work, which we'll get into in a minute, is software development and doing application security. So that was the word I was looking for here earlier when I said I was going to change my slideshow. Change it on the fly. It's application security. So there's two different flavors of this. One is SAST, which is static analysis of code, and then one is DAST, which is dynamic analysis. Basically, there's a couple of different ways you can do this as a business. You can wait till code's being compiled, and then once the code is compiled, you can deploy the code and then run fuzzing against it. If you guys have ever played with Fiddler, Jetpack, Burp Suite, any of those tools are usually for doing like dynamic testing of compiled code. And then static assessments, usually either in the IDE, like as they're writing code, it's helping set code standards, or on the actual packages themselves, right? So I run them through a pipeline, like get to Jenkins, Jenkins dumps the executables somewhere, and then my security tool picks up that package, runs it through a series of tests, and then either spits out a report and says, yes, this is good, or no, this isn't good, and then everybody works from there. I mean, just a moment, I have a visitor in my office. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. One of the three was coming to visit, so all right, application security. So, as an application security person, lots of times people write code and they'll say, we don't understand why this isn't secure, or we don't want to secure it, or the cost of securing it's too high, or we need to get this product released, or whatever. In application security, you may help set standards for what applications look like when code's being written in-house, or what code from third parties is going to look like. Or you may be looking at applications that are already up and ran by your company, and then suggesting modifications to those. People who are in a development role really, really thrive at this. If you've been a developer for any length of time and you can write JavaScript or recognize JavaScript, if you can write in C, C++, C Sharp, Go, Rust, JS, Node, whatever, if you're a languages person, this may be the route for you. Developers make enough money on their own, but if you want to get out of like writing the code every day and being measured by lines of code you write or whatever, application security can be a great way to take all those coding skills that you have and then apply a security mindset to them to have an oversized impact, right? You may also help be in charge of a code reuse library. Code reuse libraries at larger companies They won't rewrite the same functions in code over and over and over again. Instead, if everybody's writing in a common language, they'll write a accepted function for something like user sign-in, and they'll deploy that into a code library. And then if you want to build a product or build a tool or build whatever, and you need to have sign-in, you can go to the library, you type in sign-in function, you find out there's an authentication and authorization function. That's the one's approved. I'm going to go ahead and use that, and I'm going to take care of that. So you might end up being a custodian of already written code, or you might be advising on how to fix code that's reporting as not being secure, right? You might also work with the engineers to help get these tools, security tools, deployed in a code pipeline with Git, Jenkins, etc., and those kind of things. So, questions about VMDR analyst or application security? Questions about DAST or SAST scanning? I see that Zach, you've joined us. Zach, you're a dev, right?
I am.
Did I do it? Did I do it justice, or um, any commentary or anything you'd like to add or detract?
No, that was pretty good. And just I can say, like, on a DAST system or a SaaS system that I looked at when I interviewed with, it will show you where it thinks the vulnerability is, and then you can backtrace it from there all the way back. And if you can read code, it makes it extremely nice and easy.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
and then as soon as you get it, you can go back to the dev team and you're just like, hey guys, here's what it is, and here's what you need to do to mitigate it and make
Yep.
life so much easier.
I can say if you're not a dev and you get into one of these roles, it is exceptionally difficult. I have worked with implementing it as an engineer. I worked with implementing, not Sneak. I think I did Veracode was the project I was working on, and I got Veracode implemented, and we started scanning our code repositories. And the devs were like, "This isn't right. This isn't really broken." And I'm like, "Hell if I know. I have no idea." Like, the tool said it's broken. I don't know. Somebody decide. And I didn't have any leg to stand on, nor did I care, because coding wasn't my thing, right? So I was just like, all right, I don't know, the business, you decide. You can either believe the tool or believe the devs. If I had been a dev and understood what I was looking at, then I could have argued the point, right, or explained the vulnerability, or done any of the things that I would like to have been able to do, but I wasn't equipped to do.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially like if you're using something like Node and pulling in other people's modules, you'll find things that you would mark like false positive. You'll just say, "Hey, this your environment variable here is not being sanitized against any injection." I was like, well, the environment variables of folder, I don't think they're going to be injecting into that actual file, so it's not great. But yeah,
Yeah.
so you
So
did awesome.
you just reminded me of two other things that I've seen happen recently. One is application security team members building S bombs. So an S bomb is not as cool as it sounds like. I'm going to put it in chat here. But an S bomb is a software bill of materials. A lot of companies, including the federal government, are starting to require S bombs. And so companies are having to track all of their dependencies, especially if they're pulling in open source code, and be able to tell the federal government, these are the software packages I'm using. So I'm selling you this software, and this is what's inside the can. Kind of like food labeling on actual food, right? Like you have a label of what's inside the can. You got to do the same thing. Because software bill of materials weren't being published, when Log4j happened, the federal government had no idea. They had 30 years, 40 years of people writing software for the federal government, and they had no idea what had Log4j in it and what didn't. And some of those companies didn't exist anymore, so they were just screwed. They weren't going to be able to find out. The other thing that I've seen recently is doing scanning against infrastructure as code, which I mentioned earlier in the call, where infrastructure as code was spinning up our containers or building our environment or whatever. One of the recent tools that I worked with, that was a SaaS tool, actually let me stick my infrastructure as code in, and it showed me if I had provisioned network paths that were insecure, or if I had provisioned keys or secrets or API tokens within my Ansible and Terraform scripts. It also looked at my Docker build files and told me where in my Docker build files I had maybe set something up as root or gave something access to a drive that I didn't intend to. Super cool tool that could do a whole lot of things. But all of those were found because I was working with our app security guys, and they said, hey, when you put this into AWS, you can't do this because if you do, you're going to be inherently unsafe, right? So there's going to be standards that need to be set and need to be held to. All right, questions there? Now I'm going to get into the sexy stuff I know you guys have all been waiting for. Blue team. No, I'm kidding. We'll do red team. You guys can vote, blue or red. All right. Blue team. So I'm gonna give you my background on blue team. I was an incident response specialist. I worked in a NOC for a while, doing operational incidents, meaning like the network fell over, or the servers fell over, or whatever. And then after I was in security for a while, I went and worked in a SOC and was actually an analyst. So I was responding all day to the actual threats. So a report comes in from the EDR tool, a report comes in from the SIM tool, a report comes in from whatever, and somebody's got to go in and check that out and figure out what's going on. And I forgot digital forensics on here. All right. So as an analyst, I was sitting at a computer all day working tickets like a ticket monkey, right? A thing would pop up on the big screen. It would say users doing bad stuff, or users' identities doing bad stuff, or there's a weird thing happening over here. And you get to go in and look at it, right? You get to use all of your knowledge about computers and systems and open source intelligence tools to go in and look and see if that IP address is bad, or if that DNS is bad, or maybe take a copy of an executable and blow it up in a sandbox and see what it does in the sandbox, all that kind of stuff. Your blue team and SOC personnel are your grind. It's your day in and day out, 24/7, 365, first line of defense type thing. It's where a lot of people get their start in security because I'd say it's the easiest job to get starting out. You can usually get a security plus and throw yourself at one of the MSSPs, which is a managed security service provider, and they will put you in the grinder immediately, and you'll be working nights, weekends, and holidays before you know it. I've got friends who have worked in SOCs who greatly enjoy it. If you're the kind of person who feeds off of adrenaline, who loves the thrill of the chase and being off for hours and then being on and having to like go all of a sudden because the environment changed, SOC work can be really, really fun. It's really addictive. It's kind of like a CTF, but all the time. It's also easy to burn out. So I usually leave it to the younger guys. If you don't have a wife, kids, and a family, SOC life may be for you. Especially if you're looking to get started in the field and kind of cut your teeth and figure out what's going on. If you're an engineer or an architect, your analysts, your SOC analysts, are going to be your best friends in the entire world. And here's why. As the engineer and the architect, you're building stuff all the time to keep the company safe, right? That's your goal, presumably, right? And you don't really get a lot of feedback unless a breach happens. You don't get a lot of feedback about whether or not the things that you're building really work. Now, if you have a good red team, we'll talk about why that can be different. But I meet with my analysts for my SOC once a week. I'm not the SOC manager. I have no responsibility for the SOC whatsoever. My engineering team is in a completely different silo than them. But we meet every week. And the reason why we meet every week is because I asked them to bring with them the list of attacks that they've seen in the last week. Because for every attack that they're having to respond to, that means something I built didn't work the way I intended it to, or there's a hole that I wasn't aware of. One of the things about building defenses is that a defense can only be as good as you ever are as a bad guy. So let me say that again. When you're building defenses, the defenses are only ever as good as you are a bad guy. So there's a better, nicer sounding quote for that basically says the best lock that you can ever build is the one that you can't break. But that doesn't mean that somebody else can't break it. It just means that you can design a lock that can resist all the things that you know about. As an engineer, you have to be creating this loop, and as an architect, you need to be able to create this loop where you're working with your analyst and your blue team, your SOC, those guys who are seeing all those alerts all the time, and you start figuring out, how do I meet with them, understand what they see on the day-to-day, and then change our environment so that that problem is taken out, right? So that the bad guys have lost that low-hanging fruit and they have to move to something more complex. So as an analyst, you get to be the person who deals with all that low-hanging fruit. If you're an analyst today and you're not getting to meet with your engineers, I would just find out who my engineers were on Teams and start bugging them and saying, "Hey, I've seen 32 USB attacks today. We need to put USB controls in place. Hey, architect, I need help here. We're seeing all these phishing attempts. We need better phishing software, or we need to tune that phishing software. I need the engineers to take a look at what our policies are today, and we need to make some decisions, right? Everything in security happens in this kind of cycle that I can lay out for you guys later. Um, but that's what our analysts are doing. Anybody here worked in a SOC or working in a SOC? No? All right. If you want to get your first job in security, these are usually the easiest ones to get, again, but they are grinder jobs. The lowest guy on the totem pole works nights, weekends, holidays. You may get swing shifts. There's all kinds of weird things in a SOC. Um, it's really not a gravy position. They usually pay well though, depending on what you're making currently. A SOC can almost break the six-figure mark. You might get up into the 90s, 95, something like that, depending on where you're at. Some of the larger MSSPs pay less, down into the 60s. But you know what? If it's your first job and you're slinging burgers at McDonald's and you can make 60,000, working nights and weekends and a SOC, knowing that you're building for the future, I think it's worth it. I think it's a good place to start. I will say this for any of these jobs that you have, and I know Spotted, you've heard me say this 100 times probably at this point. Every job you have should pay you twice. A job should be paying you in a livable wage now, um, and an experience for your next job for the future, right? So if you're in a job that you're just slogging every day and it's not teaching you anything, you're not getting any experience, it better be paying you a lot of money, right? So if you just come in and you're just watching the paint pill every day, nobody will teach you anything, nobody will let you have any other experience, nobody will let you work on other projects. You better be making like 140% of what that role's actually worth, right? Just crazy money. In the inverse, if you get a job like an MSSP SOC job that only pays 60,000, but you're getting experience, like crazy experience, and you're learning all kinds of cool and wild things, and you've got good mentors, and you've got crazy stuff going on, and you're always changing context and getting new insight and everything, that job could be worthwhile to a point, right? It may be worth it to take the less money now for the experience that it's going to give you for the future to make you great at something else. But if you're in a job that's giving you no experience and no money, get out. Run away. I know you got to feed your family, but you can find a different job. You can find a job with no experience that'll pay you a living wage or something like that. But the sweet spot, of course, is later on in your career to find those jobs once you have that stability. Is start to find those careers where you're getting paid a lot of money and you're getting a lot of experience for the future. Um, but in the meantime, you can pick one or the other, but don't pick neither. Don't sit in a job that won't pay you experience now, or experience for the future or cash now. That's just my little tirade. Any questions? Spotted, you said you need to find an analyst position that'll let you in. If you really just want to get security on your resume and you really just want to get that first job, Eli Young out of Atlanta, EY, manages global SOCs. They'll take anybody with a pulse to work in their SOC almost. Arctic Wolf, there's a lot of connections for this Discord in Arctic Wolf. I know Sarita, who you can find in the Discord, is there. Another guy posted earlier this week in one of the other things, and he's from Arctic Wolf. There's a couple guys who work here from CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike offers a managed SOC, so they're always hiring bodies because again, it's a grinder. You just got to get in, get your year or 18 months or whatever, and then get out of there. There's a couple of other bodies, right? So if you're applying to those places, just let them know, and they'll put in a word with you, talk with you, explain what to expect and that kind of stuff. If you're doing this as a second career, or you have a wife, kids, a family, or husband, and you maybe don't have that opportunity to do nights and weekends, it might be beneficial to look at GRC or engineering or something else to get your start. If you're already an IT admin or something like that, we do career counseling here in the Discord. So several of us are hiring managers. Several of us are at very, very large companies. My original mentor and still good friend and member of the Discord is now, I want to say, the senior director or VP at like American Express, and 8 years ago he was a bartender, and now he's one of the best guys I know in cybersecurity. So if you want to sit down and meet with any of us and talk and just throw your hand up in resume workshop or jobs or whatever, and say I need somebody to sit down with me and do something like this, but one on one, and talk about what my goals are and create an action plan to actually get there. We're 110% here to support you and get you to that place. So, there's a grinder for multiple people. Just seems the easiest way into security right now. I feel like I'm starting to stack search. Well, I mean, really, yeah, you're exactly right. Right. I get these kind of resumes all the time. I'm getting resumes right now for senior positions where people have degrees and certificates but no experience. A year in the grinder will teach you a ton, and may set you up into finding something that you really want to do or something you like, or give you that stability and introduction into security. So you're building that security time on your resume, without with and getting you some of that experience, right? Also, sometimes it's just about how you write your resume. I don't recommend you lie, but sometimes you find that you're doing things securely because you're in charge of doing them and you have the opportunity to do them securely, and that can kind of help you rewrite your resume some, or at least update your bullet points so that it's going to hit that HR software the right way, right? So you could say, hey, I was a system admin and I was in charge of securing 35 internal ESXi hosts, and I participated in vulnerability management to help perform patching for the Log4j and scoping for the Log4j at my company, or whatever you got going on. Sometimes it can really just be about how you write the resume. We also have job recruiters in the jobs and resume workshop. And those resume workshops, after you get your resume cleaned up, some of those recruiters will reach out to you because they're looking for those resumes. They're looking for new jobs and that kind of stuff. That's why we let them into the Discord. It's kind of so that they can snipe our people, because we want that to happen, right? We want you guys who are looking for your first jobs to get those contacts and get the opportunity there. So, all right, let me keep going. Unless there's any questions on analysts, I'm going to keep moving forward. Everybody fairly comfortable with a SOC, Security Operations Center, what those guys are doing on the day-to-day? Anybody not? I'll give you a piece. Okay, I got a thumbs up. I'm going to go with it. All right, threat hunters. There is this super nasty trend, and if I catch any of you saying it, I will punch you in the mouth. Just full on Judy Chop, right? Of calling threat hunters thrunters. And I think it's super disgusting. It sounds nasty. It's dumb. Don't call people thrunters. You don't want to be a thrunter. It's stupid. I'll ban you. I will kick you out of the Discord. Not even kidding. It is the stupidest thing. It's like calling cybersecurity asset management CSAM, which is the same acronym for child sexual assault material. I don't know who came up with thrunter. I don't know who's using CSAM to mean asset management. Both are stupid. Don't do them. You're gonna catch me in a Wendy's parking lot. Yeah. I know Qualys has a CSAM module, and every day I'm mad about it. So I just don't want to talk about it. CSAM has always been child sexual assault material. It's CSAM. It's in the law. It's in digital forensics. CSAM is a designation. It's everywhere. CSAM is not cybersecurity asset management. Asset management is just asset management. So anyway, don't Google CSAM. That's your life advice for the day. Anyway, threat hunters. What threat hunters do is threat hunters are usually super good analysts. They may have been former SOC team members. They may be former engineers. They may be former red team guys or whatever. But threat hunters often take IOCs, which are indicators of compromise, and they look at the IOCs for your industry vertical. So what that means is, I told you earlier that I work in telecommunications. I previously worked in food and beverage. And before that, I worked in insurance. A lot of threat actors will focus on specific industry verticals because they know the kinds of softwares that are going to be in place. They know the regulations that are going to be in place. And so they attack those people. Some common examples, if you look at Fin7, Fin7's a common ATP group, or Advanced Persistent APT group, Advanced Persistent Threat. And Fin7 is called Fin7 because they focus on financial organizations. They always attack banks. They always attack coin exchanges. They always attack people who are dealing with dollars in some way or another, right, as their primary business model. By that same indicator, if you look at Black Matter often attacks the same kinds of groups. There's groups that focuses on colleges and schools and that kind of stuff. Threat actors attack what they know. So if you're smart and you're a threat hunter, the business is going to say, hey, look at other companies like ours, look at the post breach reports, find out how they're getting hit, find out what the bad guys' tactics, techniques, and procedures are, TTPs, and then look in our network for those. So, as an example, I saw a report the other day that Chinese threat actors are using LOL bins. LOL stands for living off the land, and bins is short for binaries, meaning software that's already in an operating system by default. And so they're using these LOL bins, specific ones in the Windows operating system, to attack Windows systems. So, as a threat hunter, I might, and this kind of goes in with detection engineers, I might either be a detection engineer also, or I might work with a detection engineer to say, hey, we need to look for any time that the PowerShell module is called by a piece of software that exists in the downloads folder. Why would something in somebody's downloads folder launch PowerShell? I have no idea. If I were a threat actor, that'd probably be a pretty good idea, right? To go in and put something in their downloads folder and then use it to hit PowerShell. Overall, running PowerShell is not like a unique thing to a system, and it's not necessarily something that my EDR software or my antivirus software is going to alert on, right? It's just an action that's happening. It's weird. But as a threat hunter or a detection engineer, I may go in and say, hey, I'm going to look at my detection technologies that I have, whatever my SIM tool is, whatever my EDR tool is, or whatever, and I'm going to design a rule or something that looks for this kind of behavior happening in my environment. And I'm going to test it out. I'm going to try it out. I'm going to do the download. I'm going to launch PowerShell. I'm going to do the needful to make sure this alert works. And I might dig through logs. I might go through and look at, somebody's login places. I might go and check on the environment for all kinds of different things. As a hunter, you're doing just that. You're looking for anomalous and bad stuff that nobody else has caught, and then you're putting in place new detections to help find those things, usually with the help of something called threat intelligence, TI, or TIP, threat intelligence platform. You can also get a TIP vendor, which is a third party that works with other verticals like you, and they work with, like in my case, other telecom companies, and they would say, hey, this telecom company got popped, this is how they got hit, these are the things that they saw, and we think you guys should look for this in your environment. So any questions about threat hunting? Threat hunting seems to be a fun job. You're not working a ticket queue all day. It is a lot of reading. You spend a lot of time reading post-breach reports, digging through logs, digging through SIMs, digging through testing different detections and that kind of stuff. But I think it's fairly fun. It's fairly interesting. If you like to read, it can be a lot of reading. It's not necessarily as exciting as analyst work unless you find something and then you get to declare a breach and then everybody gets to freak out with you. That's fun. Not that I would ever want my company to get hit. I'm just saying there's a certain amount of excitement of training for something for a long time and then getting to use your skills. Anyway. All right, questions there? Comments on threat hunting? All right, cool. All right, digital forensics. Digital forensics is basically what it sounds like. Everything that happens on a computer causes certain logs to be left behind, certain fingerprints essentially to be left on the system. Digital forensics may work with the analysts or threat hunters to determine what happened on a system. So an analyst may get an alert for one thing, and then after a triage by a senior analyst or a lead analyst, that lead analyst may say, hey, we need to take that box and turn it over to our digital forensics team. And our digital forensics team really needs to dig in more to give us more visibility on what the threat was and what happened here. Or the digital forensics teams needs to prove that this did happen or didn't happen because the threat actor did a good job and cleaned up their tracks. Or what often happens if you're in digital forensics is that the business comes to you and the business says, hey, we need to know what was happening on this machine. Wasn't necessarily illegal, immoral, or outside of policy, but the company needs to know if something happened. So you can end up in digital forensics kind of being in a narc role. They may come to you and say, hey, we really need to know if this person downloaded these files from our SharePoint. and send them to our competitor or send them via an email address to somewhere else. There's a lot of like insider threat type stuff that you can do with digital forensics. Also, unfortunately, there is a portion of digital forensics that works with law enforcement that handles CSAM. Like I said, child sexual assault material. So you may be asked to review a disk or review a set of files and validate whether or not they contain CSAM material. Myself having children, this is not a role that I can fulfill. I can't imagine working in that job, and I don't know anybody who's done that job for a very long length of time because there's a certain part of your soul that it chips away at. But digital forensics can cover that. Digital forensics can also be focused on and specializing in financial crimes. So that goes back to that insider threat thing where a company may hire you to come in and take a look at a laptop or something and say, hey, we want to know on this laptop, did our CISO, our CFO, our junior financial guy send our quarterly numbers out before, we did our SEC filing or whatever. Did these numbers go out? We saw a huge jump in our stock price, and the SEC is going to fine us if we don't find out if this kind of things happened. I've known guys who have done digital forensics who loved it. I did it for a short period. Got to travel some. Lots of times you get to go on site because you get to go and do a physical extraction because of chain of evidences. Sometimes you'll get called in and they'll say, hey, we're not comfortable sending you the device because we don't want to break the chain of evidence. Instead, we're going to pay for you to fly here. You're going to live out of a suitcase. You're going to bring all your tools with you. You may get a clean room. You're going to go in, take apart everything, image everything, document everything, kind of play CSI, take photographs, whatever, record your session, record your voice or whatever, and make sure that you're creating a chain of evidence that's admissible in court. That's really the big thing. Companies don't like to do digital forensics in-house because they want to be able to blame somebody else if they lose their chain of evidence. And so often a digital forensics firm will employ you if you have your digital forensics certificate and that kind of stuff. And there'll be certain ways that they equip you to fulfill that role so they can then sell your services out to people. I do know people who have done it for fintech and they enjoyed it. They did it for financial crimes and they were younger, didn't have a family, so they got to travel a lot, traveled nationally and internationally, and had a lot of fun doing this. You can get certified through SANS to do this. Course is about $10,000. I took it last year, had a whole lot of fun. You learn a whole lot of stuff. Also, you can just learn a lot of it for free. There's websites out there. You kind of need that certification to get your foot in the door with this one, but you can learn a lot of it and practice a lot of it and kind of build your portfolio for free because a lot of the tools are open source and a lot of the trainings on it are open source. It's just that SANS has done a good job of putting it all together into one thing. All right, I need to stop talking for like 2 minutes. You guys respond back to me. The thought of a job that pays for travel has always been appealing to me. Sounds very cool, even if it can be a pain. Yeah, I liked it a lot. I was married with kids when I did it. Only was gone for short stints of time. I had the benefit of being the person who went on site, did the physical extraction, and created the images, and then provided the images back to a forensic lab. So I wasn't actually the person digging through the images beyond an initial triage to see which systems were infected and that kind of thing. I've started teaching a forensics class. I could offer it here in the Discord if anybody wants to attend. Just as like it's just a really high level, like these are the tools. This is kind of what you do. There's also some free stuff to do on what's it called? Cyber Defenders, I think, .org. The one with the blue fedora on the website. They have a bunch of digital forensics challenges on there that you can go in and do. As someone who traveled and thought they would like it, it was not for me. However, it was a good experience overall, and I learned a lot. Yeah, same thing. I enjoyed mine. I hated being away from my wife and kids. I don't. People who are like, "Oh, I'm married and I hate my spouse." I don't get it. I love my wife and kids. I like my life here at the house. Airplanes and hotel rooms and that kind of stuff was not my bag. It was cool to go out and meet the people and see the new environments and take computers apart and do the fun stuff, but I wouldn't be about it. Yeah, my wife likes me being around. Yeah, it's funny. Wives are funny that way, huh? Spotted about wanting them, wanting you at home after you slayed them with a bunch of kids, right? I can't imagine. No, I can't imagine I do. My kids are 5 and 3, so they're a handful, and then we have one on the way. All right. That's gonna be our last subject today as red team. This is where all the cool, sexy stuff is. I don't do it at the front of the call because you guys wouldn't get the benefit of hearing about all the different areas. A lot of people just think cyber's red team. They hear about red team, I tell them about red team, and then they dip out of the call. So I apologize if I made you hang on to the end, but this is the cool stuff. So red team has three main roles within it. One of the red team roles is going to be pen tester. This is one of those things that you can go and get certified in. If you can run Nmap, if you know about Metasploit, a lot of those things, there's a lot of certifications that'll get you your like ethical hacker type certification and things like that, where they'll basically teach you how to be a pen tester, and then you can go out and start selling pen testing to companies. There's a key difference here that we're going to talk about between pen testers and red teamers, and that key difference is going to be the noise level at which you get to operate, or the covertness at which you get to operate. A pen tester is generally, in most cases, going to be hired by the company to come in. They're going to be given a very specific scope of work, and they're going to be told, this is the system that we need you to attack. You can be as loud as you want when you attack it. We need to know where our systems are vulnerable. And so you're going to do the same kind of things that the bad guys are going to do, and you're going to look for the low-level, low-hanging fruit in this environment. You're going to look to see that they've got their audit policies enabled, they've got EDR and antivirus technologies enabled, they've got good firewall rules, they're doing identity and access management, all of that kind of stuff, right? You're going to be making sure that they do that, and then you're going to write it up, and you're going to say, I did or didn't get in. Here's what I saw. Here's what I didn't see. Here's what you guys should probably do. Here's what you guys should stop doing. And you're going to hand that report back over to the business, right? And depending on how the report goes, the business is either going to shake their own hands and say, man, we did a good job. We're awesome. Or they're going to hand that report over to either the governance, risk, and compliance team, because the pen test is going to identify risks. And then, well, we'll just say in 90% of cases, that report's going to go to the governance, risk, and compliance team. That governance, risk, and compliance team is then going to interact with the architecture team, the engineering team, the blue team, and others to make sure that those pen test findings are actually resolved. May work with application security individuals as well to make sure that all the things that we think we're doing, that we're actually doing correctly. The reason why a pen tester is used for this is basically to provide a separation of duties. You can ask your own company, your own guys, if they're doing the right thing. But think of pen tests as kind of like external auditors. I know a guy who was building boats 10 months ago, maybe 11 months ago now. He was making $32,000 in Northeast Tennessee, working in a boat factory. Dude's making $80,000 this year, I think, as a pen tester. He went and got a pen testing certificate. He threw himself at the first company that would give him an interview, and he got a job as a pen tester. It's not his favorite thing in the world. It's not his least favorite thing in the world. He's paying down debt. He's getting a house, all that kind of stuff. And he's being a pen tester. It was a good first job for him. If he loved it, and if he loves it, he may stick with it for a while, but he'll likely move on into bigger and better things. Pen testing can be a great place to get started if you're interested in working in a puzzle, if you're interested in helping do audits and that kind of stuff, and if you're good at writing. The worst pen tests are the ones where they're like, we got in, and you're like, great, super excited that you got in. Tell me what happened and how and why and what else did you try. The second worst kind of pen tester is the one that gets in on day one of a 14-day engagement, and then they just stop. And then you get a report back that just says, we tried this one thing and we got in. And you're like, well, what the hell did I pay you for the other 13 days for, right? So the idea is that you go out and you actually do your best. You produce actual legitimate reports that are actionable, and you provide the business with an understanding of what their environment looks like and what they need to change possibly. Again, because the defenders are only going to build things that the defenders can overcome, right? So the hope is that a pen tester, you'll be able to overcome it. Pen testers may also be more equipped where They may be getting supplied by some of these other individuals, like exploit developers, um, who may give them the tools or training or toolkit in order to go out and attack these systems more efficiently or more better, however you want to think about that, so that they can provide better reports back to the business. So I'm going to pause for a minute for questions on pen testers. Key thing to remember about pen testers is they can be as loud as possible, essentially, because everybody knows that the pen testers are there and the pen testers are authorized to break into whatever they're breaking into, or to attempt to. Yeah, absolutely. If you like to teach and train people, and if you like to communicate, pen test report writing is a great way to cut your teeth in this area and to start to try and communicate risk to people. It's also more technical than GRC. So if GRC sounded interesting, but you didn't want to just be like paper pushing all day, pen testing would be a great way to be like, okay, I get to write reports and like communicate risk and that kind of stuff. But also I still want to push buttons and like do cool guy stuff, because when I grow up I want to be a hacker or whatever, right? I still want to be a hacker when I grow up too. So this is also something I'm interested in, but also know I'll need more experience before I'll be able to get into that. False. So like the guy that was doing the boat thing the other day, in all seriousness, there are pen test companies that'll put you through the grinder. If you want to do pen tests, they'll put you to work. There's even threat actors that'll put you to work. There's a story that came out recently of a specific threat actor that published a bunch of job roles on Indeed and LinkedIn and Dice saying, hey, we need pen testers. The people got hired as pen testers. They broke into the companies successfully, and then they were supposed to break in and then give their reports back over to the company they worked for. They gave their reports to the threat actors. The threat actors then took the reports, used that same exploit to then deploy ransomware onto the people's network, and then broke into the people's network. Yeah, they were not happy with this. The way that the story broke is a couple of the pen testers who were working for this company went public, and they were like, hey, we're pretty sure that we're working for the bad guys. Like, we're pretty sure we answered these online ads for this pen testing company, and the companies that we broke into keep getting broken into like days after we break into them. So we're pretty sure either the company's been broken into and the threat actors are just looking at us, which, just as a pro tip, if I were going to be a bad guy, I wouldn't try and break into individual companies. I'd break into a pen test company and then just steal their reports, because I've seen pen test reports sit in the company's filing cabinet for 3 years, completely unactioned, and the same like vulnerabilities stay out there. So that's how I would do it if I were going to be a bad guy. But all right, so what are some good certificates for this that you would recommend? There are a bunch of certificates. I'm going to show you guys something at the end when I jump off of my slideshow. There's a website that you should be using, and that website has all of the cybersecurity certificates that are available today. I think there's something like 400 certificates in this matrix, and they're all chopped up by silo, like in what area of what we've talked about tonight they fall into, and then they're also chopped up by experience level. So if you're brand new, you could go to the pen test category, go to the beginner category, and if you follow the lines on the matrix, you'll find the certificates that you should be looking at. All right. Exploit developers, these are going to be application guys usually. They're going to be guys who understand the underlying architecture of the system. And Spotted, I'm not jumping over you. I see you talk, or I see you typing, man. I'll come back to you once you get your thoughts published. I just want to keep us going, right? So go ahead and drop it in chat, and I'll come back to you. Exploit developers are going to be like your application security people. They're going to usually be developers. They're going to know how bad stuff works. They're going to know how to do the bad things, and they're going to help write ransomware and develop exploits, right? So they're going to be looking at the operating system and say, hey, how can I mishandle these kernel level hooks? How can I mishandle these system calls? How can I do these things to escalate my privilege? How can I do these things to circumvent the controls that were put in place at the software level? Those kind of things. A lot of those exploit developers are going to be working against the products that your company sells, right? So your company sells X, and it protects you from Y, or it does Y. And the exploit developers are going to work on how they can overcome the security measures that have been put in place in that product to then break into it. Exploit developers are like a thin line where, with a lot of information security, you can find yourself in some darker parts of the web or some more dangerous parts of the web as you're looking at what threat actors are doing and you're developing things. Some of the best tools in cybersecurity in the last 10 years have now been abused because they were developed by exploit developers, but then they fell into the hands of the bad guys. So one that you all are probably aware of and very familiar with is Metasploit. Metasploit was originally a tool developed by a red teamer named Mubix. I want to say it's Mubix. It may not be Mubix, but I think it's Mubix who wrote Metasploit. Metasploit was supposed to be a way to do security testing, to test your products. So they would take common threat actor exploits, build them into a Metasploit module, and then you could run them against your systems, and you didn't have to have any red team experience. And then script kiddies everywhere, including myself, 15 years ago, were like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. I don't know anything about how to write exploits, but I do know how to type the name of or the number of an IP address and hit run on a Metasploit module. And so I was off to the races, right? It was an easy way to get my start in the hacker part of what I saw as like the glorious, like sexy part of information security. The most common one now that people are aware of in the information security community is called Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike is an insanely proficient command and control setup to deploy for ransomware deployment. Originally, the developers of Cobalt Strike were selling it to blue team companies, and you had to be completely vetted. They had to know you almost personally in order for you to get a copy of it. If you got a copy of it, it was tied to a very specific and severe license check that had to occur. And the developers and salesmen screwed up at some point. They sold it to somebody who wasn't trustworthy. Threat actors were willing to pay for a lot of money for it because Cobalt Strike was so proficient. And so they turned around and sold Cobalt Strike to some bad guys. Those bad guys then ripped out the license check and started selling it everywhere. And now Cobalt Strike is the single most prolific piece of software that predates a ransomware infection, right? So they'll deploy Cobalt Strike, and then they'll use Cobalt Strike to deploy whatever their encryption software is. But there's a lot of cool stuff. If you're into application security, you're into operating systems, you're into like digging into the nitty gritty of the operating system at the basic levels and working in a kernel, or taking apart hardware or doing any of that kind of stuff, exploit developer may be right down your lane. It is not my thing because as much as I want to be that cool guy and I want to learn all that dev stuff and I want to be able to work in code and I want to like take apart pieces of hardware and like make them do things that they're not supposed to do, I really just don't have the time, energy, or like I won't say intelligence. I think I just don't have the drive to like do that kind of work, right? But if that sounds like something awesome to you, exploit developers, absolutely a job to look into. Super cool. A little bit harder to get paid. A lot of companies are not hiring exploit developers as part of their core like SOC team. And because of that, some exploit developers find themselves on the darker part of the web, selling their code to bad guys to do bad things. So I'd highly recommend you don't do that because that'll send the federal government after you. Instead, find a company that will allow you to make a living off of doing something like submitting bug reports, bug bounties, and those kind of things. Yeah, Spotted, I'm with you, man. I just need to be proficient at it. After a few years of learning object-oriented programming, I got myself to a place where I can kind of look at code and understand what it's doing. The problem is I can't look at bad guys' code and understand what it's doing because generally they're putting in layers of obfuscation or they're doing crazy things with their system calls, and it's just outside my level of expertise. But if it's your thing, cool. You can make money at it if you find you the right company to pay you for it. And then there's red teaming. This is the most likely job that you can get if you want to be on the bad side of the house, is red teaming. Red teamers really do adversary emulation. So red teamers are going to look at the bad guys who usually attack your industry vertical, and they're going to try and do the same things that bad guys are doing, but with neutered payloads. So what that means is they're usually going to be the guys who get told, hey, we want you to pretend to be bad guy X, and we want you to attack us like bad guy X does, because we think the architects and engineers and the detection engineers and the threat hunters, we think they've done a really good job protecting us from bad guy X. So let's go in and let's go in and test it, right? Act like bad guy X, use the same kind of softwares that they do, use the same tactics, techniques, and procedures and try and break into our systems and be as quiet as possible. Try not to get caught. This is going to cause your blue-red cycle or your purple cycle to occur. So I like it better as purple. A lot of companies don't want to do purple and they only want to do red-blue. There's benefits to both. I prefer purple. So what purple looks like is, as a blue team member, as a threat hunter, detection engineer, or whatever, I go to my threat intelligence group, which might be a third-party vendor or might be somebody in-house, and I say, hey, I need to know who's attacking telecommunications companies. And they say, the Russians are attacking telecommunications companies this week, and this is how they're doing it. This is what we know based on the post-breach reports. So my threat hunters go off. My threat hunters start looking for those TTPs in our environment. They don't find anything. The engineers and the architects go and they build out controls to protect against those specific types of tactics, techniques, and procedures. And then in a purple team scenario, when the blue team's done all their defensive work, the blue team says, hey, red team, we need you to now go pretend to be that group and try and break in. Don't tell us when, be as quiet as possible, and see if you can get into the network. If the detections work that we built, if the controls work that we built, if everything goes like it should, then the analysts should catch the red team guys, right? And then the analysts should declare an incident. Everybody should spin up. Your incident response process should go into place. And you really get a good test of, if we catch them, how fast can we react and how fast can we get them out of our network. In a blue and red team scenario, it's really just people dunking on each other. This is my bias showing through. I don't think blue and red is a successful way to work today. I don't like doing blue-red. And in a blue-red scenario, the blue team works all the time in a vacuum, and then the red team blows you out of the water and then comes back with these reports and is like, we pretended to be the Russians and we screwed you guys over and you guys never found us. And then we're like, okay, well, we didn't know we were supposed to be protecting from the Russians. We've been worrying about the Iranians or whatever. So yeah, you caught us because we're not doing anything about that right now, right? You're as a red teamer, your goal is not to just dunk on your business partners. On the blue team, your goal is to help design and test and understand the controls that are in place, and then figure out if you can defeat the controls that are in place by doing what the bad guys would do, to give the blue team a chance to build the best defenses possible. So I said it earlier, the best lock that you can ever build is the lock that you can't defeat, or the defense that you can't defeat. The goal of having red teamers that are on staff is they're not actually going to blow up all your systems. Instead, they're going to be a red team that tries and overcome the locks that you build and the defenses that you build, and then works with you to understand how they were able to defeat those so that you can build better locks, right? Red teaming is really where a lot of people find their passion if they're a good guy, and they want to do bad guy stuff and they want to sneak and do the covert stuff, and like you get that thrill of like overcoming a puzzle and a problem. Red teaming can really scratch that itch for you while keeping you out of prison, because even though you're doing the stuff the bad guys are doing and you're constantly getting to change tactics and procedures and all that kind of stuff, you're also working to make the good guys' lives easier, helping inform the detection engineers. I didn't talk a lot about detection engineering, but detection engineering is basically just building detections in platforms. That's a whole job in and of itself, to look at those things that the threat hunters are looking at. Look at the thing the red teamers are doing, and writing what are called YARA rules, YARA, or snort rules, or any other number of types of rules to look for these bad guys. But that's really what the red teamers do. Hopefully, if you guys pursue red teaming, you pursue it with a purple mindset of, how can I make the business better by helping the blue team build better controls by me defeating those controls, instead of, how can I just dunk on people and kind of be a jerk all the time. I've seen it work out both ways. One of the things that I've done while I was an engineer, and that I try and do today, is when we would build controls, we would immediately build the controls and then call the red team in to do an exercise before those controls went into production. So we would say, hey, in our test environment, can you bang on these as best as you can? Do everything you can. Let me know how you can get in. And if they could get in, then it was part of our iterative cycle. We would go back and design something better, and we would keep doing that until we got something put in. I'm not sure I want to be a victim of a rubber hose attack. It's more of a foam noodle. Nice. But yeah. All right, guys. That's my piece. Let me move to my next slide here. Questions. What do you guys got? We covered a lot tonight. I appreciate everybody's attendance and everybody's time and questions, especially our guests that popped in. Zach, we appreciate your time, and Omar, if you watch the recording later, we appreciate you as well. But I promised to show you guys the security or the certificates thing. So let me find that really quickly, and I'll pull that up. Here it is. Oh, okay. Arctic Wolf, EY, which is I think Eli Young, and CrowdStrike are the three that I know we have connections with in the Discord. But I'm happy to make personal introductions to anything. I probably said that terribly, but I have no issue being wrong and don't care about egos and just want the right thing to be done, but also would love to be the stealthy guy sneaking through. Yeah, absolutely. That's where red teaming gets fun, right? And there are like a couple of other things that I didn't cover tonight. There's like physical pen testing, and I think physical pen testing is like the most fun and exciting thing in the world. There's a guy online named Deviant Olam who that's his handle online. Deviant Olam does some sick physical pen testing work. His company specifically gets called to break into places where people shouldn't be able to break into, and man, they do some wild and cool stuff. And he documents it on his YouTube. Yeah, who doesn't want to get paid to break into stuff, right? They literally just like grab ladders and hard hats, and they just walk into like physically secured areas. And it does include social engineering. I'm sorry, there is a part of red teaming that can include social engineering, right? Where you just call people up. If you're a woman and you want to get into cybersecurity, social engineering is like the number one field for women because, at least in the West, people tend to trust female voices by phone more than they do male voices. And so, because of that underestimation of women, women are extremely good at social engineering. They're already wiling and cunning, we know that, but also they're underestimated. And so, female social engineers are phenomenally successful. Phenomenally. Male physical pen testers are really great because they can throw on a hard hat and they can look kind of rough and throw on a high vis vest and literally just walk into places and start plugging stuff in, and people are just like, yeah, okay, he probably works here. He has a clipboard. Yeah, just like how men in jumpsuits carrying ladders can get to places, a pregnant woman gets doors open for them all day long if their hands are full. Yeah, absolutely. Bump cap and high vis vest. I can do physical security. Yeah, I agree, Spotted. My belief is that physical pen testing roles are few and far between, because even though physical pen testing is super sexy, most companies just don't really care. Hearing that their server is open to SQL injections that anybody on the internet can access versus your physical location in Wichita, Kansas, or whatever, most people just don't care. Most know they'd fail right away. Yeah, absolutely. How to get into places you're not supposed to be. Yeah. In the Army, I've gotten into every controlled area I ever wasn't supposed to be in. In fact, for some reason, our guard hall, or our drill hall, used badged access because Health Command was there and Reserve Legal Commands at Fort Gillem, I think. And so they actually had real door badges, and they actually like wouldn't let you into the building. And so drill weekends were literally just us breaking into the drill hall over and over and over again, or finding some private and making him stand in the lobby so that he could let us all in and out of the building, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to get out and in. All right. Streaming this real quick. I'm going to give you guys this link in chat so that you have it. I would suggest you bookmark it so that you can look at it later and so you can share it with people, but I'll also share it here in the Discord or share it here on the live. This is Paul Jeremy started this on Reddit a few years ago, and then this has become super awesome, and he's done a ton of work to fill this thing out. Basically, you have the core categories here. You've got communications and network security, identity and access management, which I didn't talk about today, but identity and access management is usually a subject within engineering where you work on like single sign-on technologies, SAML technologies. You may design, along with an architect, design role-based access control and that kind of stuff. So that's its own domain. Security architecture and engineering, asset security, security and risk management, security assessment and testing, like pen testing that we talked about, software security, and security operations, doing forensics, incident handling, penetration testing, and exploitation. So you've got all these categories across the top there. And then from top to bottom, you've got expert, intermediate, and beginner. You'll see that something like the Security Plus is very beginner, but it covers a whole bunch of domains, right? Super wide. You also see something like learning a programming language. There in the middle, it considers to be an intermediate task, but the intermediate task ends up covering a bunch of areas, right? So if you want to figure out how do I get the job that I want, a lot of times you can come here, look at this chart, and say, I want to do pen testing. I'm going to go over here and look. The Pen Test Plus is listed here. It's given by CompTIA, and it's a $349 exam. So that's what I'm going to go look at and see if I can get. Oh, but Certified Professional Ethical Hacker is only $170. So if I only have so much money to spend, maybe I want to focus on that. There's a bunch of other stuff here. My recommendation for you is that if you're interested in doing any of the jobs I talked about doing tonight, you go to Dice, you go to LinkedIn, you go to whatever else, Indeed, you look up the job title that you're interested in doing, and you look at those jobs and look and see what the requirement is. There are going to be certificates that they prefer, and you're going to see other people. I can tell you as a hiring manager, when I go to write a job description, I go and look at other people's job descriptions and see what other people are hiring for to help inform me on what I should be looking for. I'm not a cloud guy, but I'm hiring a cloud engineer right now. And I know I want him to be good in AWS. And so I went and looked at a bunch of AWS cloud engineer job descriptions and looked to see what certificates they were hiring for. And then I included those in my job description because even though I don't know a lot about cloud, everybody else is focusing on those. That looks to be the certificates that I need to look for. And inversely, because those are the certificates that I look for, those are the ones that I'm seeing on people's applications when they apply, right? And I'm going to give preference to those. So I would recommend you to do the same thing. Don't go out here and find Billy Bob's security certificate if Indeed and LinkedIn and Dice are not looking for people who have Billy Bob's cybersecurity certificate. Maybe maybe beneficial to you to learn, but it's probably not going to contribute to you getting a job if that's what your goal is, right? If you're wanting to make a career out of it. Goes without saying, if you're already working in the IT field, your company may have options for you to get education or certs paid for, even if in part. Absolutely, 100%. If you have, I'll tell you guys the big like racket that's going right now. It's not really a racket, but I'll tell you what I'm doing and what I've seen a bunch of other people do. There's a school called WGU. It's Western Governors University. Western Governors University is a pass-fail system where you attend the classes, you take all the courseware, and then you either pass or fail the class. There's no grade or GPA. And one of the things that they do is that they make the final for the class be the certificate for the class. So if you go and take a forensics class from WGU, the final for that class is going to be a voucher. You'll take a assessment test to make sure that you're not going to waste the voucher, right? Because they want you to be successful. And then somewhere here in the forensics field, I don't remember which one they used for the forensics class, probably the CompTIA one. I'd have to flip through here and find it or log into my WGU account. But for that forensics course, they're going to have one of these certificates be the final for that class. So what you do is you go and you find a company that will pay for your tuition. You take the classes for this bachelor's in cybersecurity. Every class comes with a certificate, essentially. I think it ends up being like 12 certificates or something if you take the whole bachelor's program. And then you get your school to pay for your bachelor. I mean, you get your company to pay for your bachelor's. You get WGU to pay for all the certificates, and you come out of WGU in like 2 years with no debt because you got your company to pay for it, and then 12 certificates because your certificates were your finals. I have pushed this on like every 19-year-old I know. In Tennessee, we have the Tennessee Promise, so you can do your first 2 years of school for free. Take those 2 years take those 2 years of free school, go to Chattanooga State or whatever company you can go to. It doesn't matter. Just go to a 2 year state school that's free if you have that benefit, so that you have zero debt. And then at 19, start applying for jobs on help desk, service desk, platforms, whatever job you can get. It doesn't matter. Get your foot in the door in IT at 19 with a company that's big enough that they offer tuition reimbursement. Have them pay for the 2 years of WGU that you need, and come out of school at 22 with a bachelor's in cybersecurity, 2 years of experience in information security in general, and 12 certificates related to cybersecurity. There is no better racket right now. And so far, zero of the students that I've talked to and given this idea to have participated in it. But I know 8 people who have started second careers by doing this, because Tennessee will also pay for you to go and get an associate's. Will pay for you to get an associate's if you're older and you're looking to start on a second career. And so they've worked their full-time job. They've let the state pay for their 2-year degree, their associates, then transferred into WGU, and then spent 24 months doing that. And then they're 45 and they're starting their second career. They got 15 more years of work experience as a cybersecurity specialist, analyst, whatever they wanted to do. Anyway, I can't be right all the time, but I think I'm right on this one. The reason why you don't know anybody doing the SANS program is because nobody can afford it. The SANS program, unless you can get in under the VET program, can be like stupid expensive. I think VRIF in general chat, if you go and tag VRIF, I'm like 90% sure VRIF did his bachelor's or his master's through there. And then there are other people who are going through like the veterans program. Thiel, Thiel, I think is in chat. I may just know him on LinkedIn, but I think he's in the Discord as well. He got in, he was a vet coming out of the Army, and he got into the SANS military program. Oh, yeah. Okay, there you go. So yeah, the Vet Success Program. That one's pretty popular. I'll tell you, as a hiring manager, I don't really care if you have a degree. If you have experience and certificates, I'll gladly hire you. That's something called new collar hiring. I'll put this in chat. You can look it up. If you're a hiring manager, you may have to argue with your HR team to do this, but we don't require certificates. I mean, we don't require degrees where I work and the positions I hire for. Instead, I say X number of years of experience or a degree, plus so many years of experience or whatever. The idea behind this is that a lot of people got into security or IT over the years, and they don't have formal schooling because a lot of the neurodivergence that drives people into tech fields also drives them away from traditional education. And so you have a kid who couldn't pay attention. I'm speaking about myself now. You got a kid who was a high achiever, couldn't pay attention, but did great on standardized testing or whatever, had a lot of potential, but didn't have a really good job to realize that potential. They got into an IT role. The computers do what the computers are told to do. They're really good with computers. They escalate their way up their career field, and they don't have a degree, but they've been at it for a while. I would much rather have that tuition reimbursement thing in place, bring you in because you've got a couple years in IT, get you the piece of paper that you need, and make use of your success instead of taking the 22-year-old who's coming out of college with their bachelor's and no experience, right? So I have the benefit of being able to do that at my company. IBM, Google, Cisco, others have all adopted new collar hiring as well, where they'll take people with experience but no degrees and then pay for their degrees. So, all right. Remember talking to a few small business owners, and they always prefer experience over education. Absolutely, 110% of the time. As a small business owner, I ran a managed service provider for a short time, a couple of years, doing low voltage cabling, doing management and security and installs of desktop operating systems and that kind of stuff for businesses here in Tennessee where I live, and would absolutely prefer experience over education every time. There are times when education is appropriate, and I think it's beneficial. I'm working on my degree right now. It's weird being in a management role, hiring people with degrees in some cases and not having one. But I'm working on my degree, and I'm learning things that I never learned through experience, right? All the stuff about risk and governance and compliance that I talked about earlier with Omar was learned because I had to take a class on risk and how to mitigate risk and transfer risk and all those kind of things. So absolutely a place for it. But when the chips are down, I often prefer experience over education. All right. That's all of my time or your time rather, that I want to take up for tonight, but I'm available for questions. So if you guys have more, I'll hang around for a few more minutes, but otherwise I'll make myself available via the general chat or any of the sections that are relevant. If you're looking for some direct mentorship in one of the roles that you heard about tonight, you can jump down into the farm. The farm is a series of channels down in the bottom of your channel list for this Discord. And those channels focus on specific areas: blue team, red team, GRC, threat intel, etc. Yeah, NanoFrog, super excited to do this. Super excited to share. I am only in this field because somebody reached back down the ladder and pulled me up with them, and that's our goal.